Hey everyone, welcome to the Dare to Care podcast, the podcast where we talk about the inner workings of ministry at Inspire Family Fellowship and community stories within the church. If you have comments, stories, or questions about Inspire or our Dare to Care ministries at any point during our podcast today, feel free to send those questions to carol@inspirefamily.org. That's Carol with an E. We also invite you to join us in person at Inspire any Sunday or Wednesday that you're able, 523 North 21st Street, Bismarck, North Dakota. Our Sunday services are at 9:15 and 10:45, and Wednesday nights at 7. My name is Ty Farnsworth. I'm the worship coordinator at Inspire Family Fellowship, joined today by our Dare to Care coordinator, Carol Johnner, and our guest today, pastoral counselor, community care pastor, and the trademark people whisperer, Ernie Hockett. Ernie, how you doing?
Yay!
I'm doing pretty good. See? You see what I did there? I even whispered into the microphone. Everyone's already captivated already.
Yes.
I like it. So, Ernie, how many years have you been at Inspire now?
I think it's going on 5 now.
I believe so, yeah.
Wow.
That's kind of crazy, actually.
5 years, they go by so quickly, especially when you get to be my age.
Sure. So, take you way back. Where does your faith journey start? I mean, what's your background? Where'd you meet Jesus the first time? Where did you start with this whole Jesus thing?
I have to start actually the generation before me to qualify where I came to Christ. The generation before me, my dad's generation, he was born into a family of so many kids. There's like eight kids. Dad was an alcoholic. His mother, nobody in that generation knew anything about Jesus. Way back, our family was Quakers. And out of that family, my great-great-grandfather, he left that colony because it was too religious for him and moved out into the Wild West. And then, obviously, he had my grandfather, and out of that came my dad. None of them in those generations after he left the colony knew Jesus or the Lord. So you can imagine how wild these people were. They lived in Madison, South Dakota, and my dad was part of a group that he was a fairly decent man, but very poor, and just had no sense that there was someone greater than him, and just went about his life. Married my mom when she was 16 years old, and they began to have children right away. And in that lineup, third to the youngest was me. And it's just really an interesting story because they lived in the town of Madison, South Dakota, south of the railroad tracks. You know what I mean by that? They were those people. And a loving church in town decided to send some ladies over to our house because they knew my mom was sick and give us food. And then they invited my older brothers to come to Sunday school. And as they went to Sunday school, they came to know Jesus. And then came home to mom and dad and said, hey, I accepted Jesus in my heart today. And my mom and dad go, oh, that's kind of cool. What's that all about? You can imagine not knowing Jesus, and here they come home. Oh, that's great. Now go out and play.
But that technically started from people just coming over to care for your family.
They came over to care, okay? Just hold that thought right there. They came over to care for us in tangible ways that really, really unleashed the love of Jesus. My parents didn't know Jesus, but they felt the love, and they were drawn to that. And so the kids, my oldest brother, Buddy, he came in just excited about Jesus coming in his heart. And he said, Mom and Dad, you should come along with me to church. And of course, they played this game because they were getting free babysitting from the church people. They could sleep in. Dad would say, go ask Mom. Mom would say, go ask Dad. But then there were some special meetings in town called revival services. I was a little baby then. Little bitty Ernie out there, just a tiny little caregiver. And during that time, my dad, he relented and said, okay, we can go to this service on one condition, that I sit in the back row so that if I don't like what's being said, I can leave.
Yep.
Okay? So they were sitting in the back row, and the preacher must have delivered a pretty decent sermon. Whatever it was, at the end of the service, in the tradition I grew up with, they called you forward like Billy Graham style. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
To go give your heart to Jesus. My folks didn't know what that meant, but they were already set up in the dare to care of love. Whatever these people had, they said to themselves, we want this. And so, like the third verse of the song, my mom leans over, she's holding me in her arms, and she says, hey, that sermon hit me right between the eyes, and I know it's really embarrassing to go up there, but somehow I know that that's what I need to do, because she said, Bud, whatever we're doing here is not working. And he agreed with her. She said, I don't know about you. And my dad said my mom was just shaking like a leaf. And they walked out into the aisle, and the woman that was sitting ahead of us said, ma'am, could I take your baby? And that was me. And so she handed me to this lady while my mom and dad went up
To accept.
and, to coin a phrase, they went to get saved.
Yep.
Which they were by the love of Jesus, but you can't forget also by the love of the people who dared to care for our family. So after that, I was, with now a mom and dad that loved the Lord. Their families did not understand this, Ty. It was totally foreign. Oh, now do you think you're better than us? Oh. No, it's not about that. We have found something that makes us actually feel at peace. And who can buy peace? Yep. Best commodity out there, but
they're passing on the love that they received.
Yeah, exactly. And so it wasn't a fad. They began to feel differently, and so they took us to church every week. And in another revival service, I was 9 years old, literally felt the call from the Lord, and that this is what I needed as a little kid even. Even as a little kid, I knew I'd done wrong things. And felt conviction from the Holy Spirit, and I walked forward, and just like my parents, then my mom and dad were next to me and some other church people, and they prayed for me, and they led me in a simple prayer, gave my heart to the Lord. And you know what? At that point, Jesus put a rubber band around my body. I've tried to sneak away a few times, but I get to the end of the rubber band, and he pulls me back. But what a journey of faith.
Sure. And your dad, he ended up becoming a pastor, correct?
He actually did. Woke up in the middle of the night, one night, and I remember us living in Pierre, South Dakota. I was about a kindergartner at the time. My dad was the worship leader, but back then it was a song leader. You didn't have bands. You had a lady on the piano. You had hymns, hymnals, and then you had a guy up there or a gal leading the singing. So my dad was leading the singing. And one night had this dream that he was looking into the pit of hell. And he saw people in there. And as he was looking in there, he heard their cries. And that's how he came awake in the middle of the night. And he woke my mom up, who was right next to him, and he said, Evelyn, wake up. And so she woke up. Isn't this a cool thing? Yeah. And he said, told her about that dream, and he said, I think God is calling me to preach.
Wow.
And she looked at him and said, are you sure it's not the devil? Because the last thing she wanted to be on earth was a preacher's wife. And so, and then not long after that, he became a preacher. But the cool story behind that is he decided to go early to church the next day. And unbelievable, this was an act of God. I believe it with all my heart. He was met there by the preacher of the church, who never, ever came that much early. My dad said, hey, what are you doing here? He said, I was awakened in the middle of the night
my.
by God that told me I had to meet somebody at the church because there was a call happening. And my dad said, my goodness, that confirms everything here.
Yeah.
Where can I go? They sent us to White River, South Dakota. My dad became a preacher right out of sin, right out of not even knowing Jesus. Again, because of the people who cared and gave my dad the chance and my mom to be in the spaces where then Jesus could reach their heart.
Sure.
Yep.
So fast forward then, what was your own call to ministry? When did you feel the pull to become a minister to other people?
It was a Sunday night in Winter, South Dakota. We had Sunday night church then. Back then, I don't know if it's codependency or what, but it seemed like we were at church all the time. Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And then if there was a special event, we were at that too.
Yep.
But I remember sitting there one Sunday night, and I was always passionate for the Lord. Being an ADHD man, I'm telling you what, I could imagine I was in heaven. I could imagine I was dancing with angels and the metaphors that go along with it. And I get so happy inside and loved the Lord and always said I was going to do what God wanted me to do. At the time, I was a janitor in the high school, but not your normal janitor. I was the type of janitor who started a youth movement in town that grew to 100 in that little town and collected leaders, and we blessed the town. So then as a janitor, I could put scriptures inside of their lockers of the kids who went to this and become a Dare to Care agent myself. And at first they didn't know who was doing this, and they didn't need to know who was doing this, but one by one they figured it out. And even years later came back and said, thank you, because those scriptures touched my heart. And I was the type of janitor, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I tell you what, there's something about showing the love of Jesus. People want to be near that.
Yeah.
They want to be near it because it's what
It's
their
contagious.
soul cries out for. Don't you guys agree with
Yeah.
that? Isn't that what your soul cries out for? It's what we all need. And we're searching for it. And it feels like home when we find it.
They're like, what has he got that I want? I mean, I want
And
that.
it's true. The Bible says, always be ready to answer anyone who asks you about the hope that that is inside of you. And so I spoke at their graduation as their janitor. Can you believe that?
That's cool.
And then teachers would say, hey, you were called for something more than this. And I said, right now I'm called to this because there's people here. It says where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he's in the midst. And I always said if I was going to be a janitor all of my life, I was going to be a Jesus janitor. I was going to be sweeping them floors and cleaning their boards and hoping in the process Jesus would sweep their hearts and he'd clean their hearts. And one night I was sitting in church and a sermon that I don't even think touched on that, and I felt like I should go forward. And I knelt at this altar, not altogether wondering what this was. And our pastor walked up, put his hand on my shoulder, and they'd always say, why are you here? And right at that second, I knew. And I looked up at him, and through tear-filled eyes, I said, I believe God is calling me to preach the gospel. And he looked at me and stood me up and hugged me, prayed for me, and everyone around did. And he said, well, we're going to get this started. And I was in a church where you didn't need big degrees, none of this. They did it totally Peter, James, and John
You
style.
have the passion.
Sure.
You have the passion. I had known lots of scripture, so it was like immersion. Here's what I'd like you to start doing. And after that point, I served on the church board. I ran the teen department for a while in that church. I led the singing through the piano and all this. So I led the children's department. I got immersed into all of this, visited the sick, all of this stuff as like a 18, 19, 20-year-old man, and just totally fell in love with people. I was before, but when you when you mix a desire over here with the heart of Jesus, that's where caring, you can't stop it. Because
A Jesus janitor always has to clean.
a Jesus
there you
janitor,
go. I
he
like
comes
that.
in and he fills you so full of him
Yeah.
that you leak all over everybody. You just begin to leak all over, and you can't stop it because it's that overflow that much more than you can contain, heaven fills you
The
with.
joy.
And it is. It's the joy of the Lord, and the Bible says that's my strength. And so that was my initial call.
Sure. So I don't mean to discount the rest of your story, because your whole life story and journey of preaching is wonderful and immense, and we simply don't have time for it on this podcast.
And
So I
all
wanna-
the people that he has
Well,
impacted
exactly.
too.
It's, I mean, I would love to just have you sit down and just tell your life story on one of these podcasts. But skip ahead 20, 30 now. Are you past 40 years of ministry?
Yeah, I am.
So Randy talked a few weeks ago about how when he started Inspire, you told him it's a dumb idea. Don't do it. And then a couple years later, they approached you about joining staff here.
Yeah.
What were you doing before you joined Inspire here?
I was with another church in town, and I was doing one of the many things that I can do. I can really do about anything in the
He's a
church
really good
that's
painter, too.
that's
Did you know
needed.
that?
I did know that. It's bizarre.
Yeah,
Man of many talents.
I taught art for 4 years. But I was working in a church. It was after a huge crash in my life, where everything collided. And I had been preaching to everybody else, but God said it's time to look at yourself. It's when God looks at the car, imagine you're the car, and says you're in serious need of a tune-up because there's so many things in this car that have been neglected. Yes, you got the engine running, you got the basic things going.
Ernie, did you have a lot of lights on? The engine light, the gas light.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah,
my whole dashboard was
Yep,
flashing,
see?
flashing. And God said it's time. Okay, He says it's time. And during that time, what I did is I resigned. I resigned from the church that I was at with the plan of actually getting some very, very serious help. All of us know what it's like to grow up where we grew up, okay?
Yep.
And we look across and we say, they must have had it really good growing up. But as I talk to people, almost 100%, we're the human race. We all have our own stuff. It might be a little bit different, but the core of it is the same. We grew up in how we perceived things and things that actually happened within the family. The hush things, because families all have those things that say don't tell anybody else about it. You have to deal with that at some time in your life, and this was my time to deal with it.
Yep.
At the time, our church was going gangbusters, and I was counseling a lot of people, and God said, now it's your turn. Because I probably made the mistake, or it was the best thing I ever did, was as I was helping all these other people. One time when no
forgot
one
about
else was
Ernie.
in the church, I took a chair and I put it right in front and I stared at the cross. And I said, what about me, Lord? 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later,
Yep.
I knew I had to resign, and I had to take care of some business, my friends.
Sure.
And so I was doing that. And so when I quit, I didn't know if I would enter back into pastoral like that ever again. So I went and did some, some carpentry, a little bit of, odd jobs and stuff like that, some handyman stuff and painting and landscaping and all of that stuff, and was perfectly happy because I'd run into people and I'd talk to them about the Lord, and I thought
He's
maybe
still a Jesus janitor.
I was, the cleanup man. And then during that time, then another pastor approached me and he said, hey, Ernie, you going to come back? It had been 3 years already. And so, the Essenes, they'd go out into the desert for 3 years to do business with God. And so I consider myself kind of an Essene. Out in the desert, just me and God. I had a lot of theology that I thought was true, but I began to speak to God, and he said, let's tweak that just a little bit here and there. But what would my dad say? Well, I called your dad to his existence in me, and I called you to yours, he said, and here's the deal. You need to listen to me. And he began to shape me and to mold me and make me teachable and stuff like that. So I was approached by a pastor, and he said, I have a job. I have a job for you. And so I went to this church, and I was a worship pastor for about 7 years. And we were about to build a new church. And right after Christmas, I had just done this whole Christmas thing. He said, I want to see you in my office. And nobody wants to hear that. And
the nerves, yep.
You never know where these paths are going to take you. But as we look in hindsight at what God has done, you know why God allowed that to happen. But they brought me into the office, and they just said, hey, you're doing a great job. At that time, I was in my 50s. And they said, hey, we're going to go to the new church without you. And they said, sorry, you've done a great job, and we're just going to basically get somebody younger. And so I could have gone and sulked and all of this kind of stuff. But what I did is go to my wife, talk to her about it, because she's my best friend. And we cried because we'd miss our friends and all that stuff. But I left that meeting saying, hey, God, this is probably what you want. I have no idea where income is coming from. But you who own the cattle on 1,000 hills and you made the stars, I think you can take care of us. But the hardest thing, Ty, was to wake up and carol the next day and not have a job.
Oh, yeah.
And be staring out the window of what am I going to do? And I asked God what to do, and he goes, well, what would you do normally? Well, I'd go to the bank, and he says, we'll get dressed and go to the bank.
Try to live out the normal.
And go to the bank. And so I did. And this might have been 3, 4, 5, 10 days afterwards. Just no aim. Didn't know what I was going to do. So I did this. And I went down to the bank. First person in the door was a person I taught in school. And she approached me, gave me a big old hug. And she goes, what are you doing now? That's the worst question you can ask a man who's just lost his job, or now a woman. Do not ask me that question. And I said, well, I'm between jobs right now.
She'd be like, so how much time do you have?
I know. And she says, oh, you're a really good man. You're a really good man. And is there anything you're thinking about doing? And I said, well, I don't know. It's always been in the back of my head to want to start a church of some kind. And I said, if I started a church, would you be a part of it? She said, in an instant. And she said, you'll have to go tell my mom too, and my dad. I said, where's your mom? She's in the bank over in Mandan. So my next job was to hop in the car, unemployed, but employed by the Heavenly Father. Because care is not what I'm being paid for. Care is who I am, and care is what Christians need to immerse themselves in. Because we can get so selfish. So I just drive over there. I don't know what I'm going to find. I asked where Jan was. They said she's upstairs. So I walked upstairs. She's on the phone like this. And she's actually on the phone with her daughter. She says he's here right now. Oh. Just like this. And I walk in there. She puts the phone down like this. She goes, I heard you're going to start a church. Jerry and I would love to do this with you. And I say, what? She goes,
I only spoke of it a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I only spoke of it well, my daughter told me about this, and it would be really neat, she said. And then she dropped her head. And she goes, I said, what's going on? She looked up and tears were in her eyes. She said, I was just in my car this morning. I was driving down the road, stopped at a light, and I go, Lord, we haven't been in church in 8 years. And there isn't one Christian who said they were our friends that has contacted us to say, would you come with us? Why aren't you? Can we help? Are you okay? Not one. And she said, I said a prayer to the Lord. If you're really real, oh man, this is going to get you guys. If you're really real, could you send confirmation to myself and my daughter today that you're real and that you still are not done with us? And I walk in, talk to Ashley. I walk right in her mother's office and just say, good news. I don't know what this is going to be about, but maybe God is in something here. And so started this little church in a funeral home. It was called City Life. Isn't this an exciting life?
Oh.
And we were in a funeral home. We should have called it Resurrection. There were dead bodies upstairs,
Yes.
my friends.
Oh.
I mean to tell you what.
Was there a Jesus janitor?
And no, I don't know. I don't know. But in that little place, we grew to 70. And then as a result of that, down the line, I started with no money whatsoever. Usually churches start with a promise from another church, or they have people. And no, I care so much about people, and I don't care what they make for a living. Come on in. You're welcome in this. But it wasn't enough to fund the ministry. And so we began to meet with Surprise Church, and we eventually merged with them. We took all of those people over there. And the people that I had helped and I had groomed, we got busy, and we helped in that church, and we became a lot of really neat things, and it was a really good hand off from this, and I got to be kind of a care pastor, right? And then started working with the growing teen department, or we started it, and just doing what I do. And I remember then 3 years into that, what a story. 3 years into that, God began to speak to me again. I had no other job, but he says, you're basically done. You're done at Surprise. And I said, God, I do like it here. I do like what I'm doing. And I don't know what you're doing. And so I went home to visit at my mom's house. Anytime I've had a struggle in my life, I take a few days with my mom. And I just spell it out. And Mom was always so wise and always supported me with love. She was my Dare to Care agent. And she just said, I want you to listen to God. Don't matter about whatever. You can trust in God, because your dad, my dad who had been dead for a long time, her and him were such a team. They trusted in God through the worst times. She said, I can attest through my past that God will be faithful. And so I began to pray about it, and God said, yeah, I'm definitely, I'm done. You're done. And so I go back, write up the letter. I meet with the pastor. He's my friend. And I hand him the letter, and he goes, what's this? And I said, well, read it. And he read it, and he was really dumbfounded. Wow. Are you sure God is speaking to you? And I go, yep. And this was a Friday. And I walked away from there, and it wasn't like the other deal. I felt God was in it so much. And the crazy thing is, my phone rang the following Monday, and it was Pastor Randy. And he said, the board just met over the weekend. They said we need a care pastor, because he said I'm pushed too thin here. And I know you're at this other church. Is there any way that you would at least pray about it?
'Cause didn't you, Bubba, and Randy have like this dream even like way long ago? You know what I mean?
15 years before, God had planted the seed, because we all worked together, and we said, what would it ever be like to work together?
All of a sudden this comes true.
And drew up a plan for what that would look like. And then didn't visit that until I was actually working here. And then
Bubba
found out
found it.
that all of these we were following that thing almost
Yes, you were.
to a
So
T.
it was God's plan, because that's hidden. They didn't even look at that for how long? Yep.
Years.
Yep.
Years, yeah.
And then in 3 days, it's God calls you from one job, and it's like, oh, here's that church that you planted.
And I
Surprise.
usually would have prayed about that, but this was pre-prayed,
Yeah.
and I knew that this is what God wanted me to do. I just knew in my heart of hearts. Randy had been my best friend, best ministry friend all of our lives, and we're so polar opposite and so different, and yet our hearts function and beat as one when it comes to
good together.
ministry and when it comes to serving people.
So here we are 5 years later. We're starting this Dare to Care thing.
That was kind of Ernie's idea, I think.
Another one of your ideas coming true. And there's a lot of ways to model Dare to Care, but one way that I've looked at it is how can we emulate what Ernie does? Mm-hmm. You know, because you got such a gift, and using the word magic in a church is not always the best thing to say, but you have such a magic with people. Mm-hmm. If there was one word or one sentence just to explain how good you are with people and making people feel seen as this person who is so good at just bringing people in and making them feel like they're the only person in the room. Mm-hmm. Directing that at Dare to Care, what's that secret?
Whew. Ty. My goodness, you guys are asking some really good questions. And to me, that's not a real hard one. I've been called to do what God called me to do. And He's given me the skill set that He's given me. He's given you the skill set that He's given you. You might not be as demonstrative. You might not be as sometimes just spontaneous, or whatever the deal is. Some call it crazy. But I have to do the best me for Jesus that I can do, because I'm going to stand before Him one day and give an account for my life. And I can't necessarily teach into your skills because you have different skills than me. But one thing I can encourage people in is no matter what skills you've been given on the spectrum, no matter what they are, they have to be given back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because He's given you them, and how we give them back to Him is how we treat other people.
Yep.
Because one thing I know we will be accountable for when we get to heaven, no matter if we're a nerd, a cowboy, a sailor, a truck driver, a janitor, a pastor, we're accountable for how we treated people. And Jesus says it right in the book of Revelation, that some got into heaven. The people who got into heaven, it's because you fed people and you clothed them and you visited them. And why people didn't get into is because they lived a self-centered existence. And all they cared about all of their lives is themselves. I wasn't made to do that, and I was made to encourage all sets of people, no matter what their personality or whatever is. They got something and they're holding in their hands something that could be used for the ministry. What did Moses have in his hand? All he had was a staff. That's it. It's just a staff for herding sheep. But I'm telling you what, he could look at it as a staff, or he could look at it as something that Jesus put in his hand to go in to a enslaved group of people and to free them from the darkness they were in. And this staff came in very, very handy when that happened, because it became a God staff. If you're good with numbers, God can use those numbers to be God numbers and to reach people for Him, because in the end, what will have really mattered is not our golf scores. I won't imagine how good we were in basketball unless unless we were really good in basketball and we gave all the praise and all the honor and the glory where it belongs. That this talent was given to me, and I'm going to use that,
The core of it is your heart.
Right, not to just score points.
Yep.
And if you're a gardener and he's given you that tool to be a gardener, he didn't just give that to you so that you could produce fruit, physical fruit, but you could produce some fruit for heaven. Are you hearing what I am saying? Do you know what the rock is cooking?
I think Ernie one time said, it's a little Jesus seasoning.
It is.
I love it.
It is. 'Cause
Everybody needs a little Jesus seasoning.
Sure.
they do. I forgot that I had
Yes,
said that.
I always remember that.
But I'm capable of a whole lot of crazy
now
stuff.
I've got Jesus janitor, Jesus seasoning. I've got lots.
Just
Jesus,
start a whole brand.
I love it.
a whole brand Jesus seasoning, man. Just put
And then
this.
his Jesus freak shirt that he's got.
Yep, shove this into your attitude and see what happens.
Yep. He's got all of them.
Perfect. Ernie, thank you so much for everything that you do. Not just here today, but the blessings that you provide this place and the people in this place. You are just such a blessing, not just to have on
Ty,
staff,
that
but a
humbles
blessing
me.
to have here.
He's
and
a light.
to know.
Man,
you're just
thank
a
you.
light in a lot of darknesses that people have. And so thank you for that.
Well, I tell you what, I took a test years ago and I came out really strong with shepherding people. And the second thing that was very, very high was encouragement. And so anybody that's listening to this podcast, the old janitor / pastor and whatever the Lord wants me to do, I encourage you to listen with your heart to what has been said here today and decide that you're going to turn your talents and your treasure and everything you have over to Jesus, and then pray the dangerous prayer. Jesus, use these any way that you can, so that others are in heaven with us one day and they come to know the saving grace of Jesus. Because when we gather on that other side, all of us have to ask again, what really mattered here? And the things that come up on top are not things. They're people. And they're things that will survive us being in the flesh humans, things like kindness, love, and joy, and peace, and all of the fruits of the Spirit. And the test of that is, can they tarnish? Can they rust? You ever get tired of them? That tests whether they're eternal or not. And so I don't know any of you that walk in your house at the end of the day just tired as tired get out, and you look at your kids or look at your families and go, people showed me way too much love today. I can't take it anymore.
Nope.
Or wait a minute, everybody today was kind. I wish somebody would have put me down today. It's those things you can never get enough of. And that's what heaven is going to be completely full of. And so while here on earth, it's my aim to leave the house every day and say these words right here. And this is my motto for life, is to say to myself and pray this to God. God, you gave me one life to live. One. I'm only going to be here for a while longer. May my life not hurt a soul today. And may my life become a blessing to everyone that I meet today. And then that's what guards my steps all day long. No matter who I meet, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they have tattoos all over their bodies. It doesn't matter
What's their heart?
That's right, because we all need the same thing. And it's the things that Jesus gives, and the Spirit rains down upon us.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Ernie. You're a man who's so wonderful at prayers, but I'm going to pray for you real quick.
You are too, my friend.
well,
And so is Carol.
Thank you.
She won't admit it,
No,
but she
no, I'm
is.
good.
One of these days, Carol, I'm going to have you do
thanks.
the closing prayer. But Father,
Oh,
thank you so much for Ernie and just the things that he brings to the table here and the things that he brings to all of the people here at Inspire. Continue to bless him in whatever he does, whether it be in this building or outside of it. May the people that he encounters be blessed and see you through him and through everything that he does, feel the kingdom here on earth. Continue to bless him, continue to bless his family, and we thank you so much for the community that he provides here. Help us to feel that example and to use that example in everything that we do going forward. It's in your mighty name that all of this is possible. Amen. Ernie, what's the best way to reach you?
Smoke signals, definitely smoke signals.
Just send them out.
If I see smoke, I'm there. I'm a fireman for Jesus too.
Isn't there candle
Sorry, I
fires
do have a
just
little
recently?
sense of humor, and I think you guys know this
Oh
too.
yeah,
Oh, that's
we
okay.
need a whole session with just Ernie's humor too. So
Yep, the best way you can reach me, you can go to the website, and you can find my email. Right now, I'm the care pastor of, well, we say 1,500 maybe, and then their families, so far beyond that. Best way, if you have a question for me, if you want to get to know me or meet me, go to ernie.hockett@inspirefamily.org.
Perfect.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And then, if Warren said, I'm not afraid to give my number out, but initially, you know how it
or
goes.
come check them out. Come in the building
Yeah,
and say
absolutely. You won't miss Ernie if you come in the
No,
building.
it's-
So if you guys want to do that, we
hi.
have
Miss him when he's
services
not here.
Sunday mornings 9:15 and 10:45, and Wednesdays at 7. If you have any other questions apart from Ernie about the podcast or about Dare to Care, feel free to reach out to Carol. That's carol@inspirefamily.org. Carol spelt with an E. Otherwise,
Come and check us out, people, if you care.
Oh,
I love
it. Dare to
If you
care.
come on over here, if you dare.
I love it. Thanks, Ernie, so much. Carol, thank
thank
you.
you, Ernie.
We'll see you guys
Thanks,
next
Ty.
week.
Thanks, everybody.